All right, so today we're diving into a cold case, and it's a tragic one for sure. It's the story of Julie Ward.
Oh, yes.
She was a young British woman found dead in Kenya's Masai Mara Game Reserve way back in 1988. And we're going to try to unpack everything that happened. We're working with excerpts from the Wikipedia entry on the killing of Julie Ward.
Okay.
I'd love to tell you, this one is a real head-scratcher.
It is a really interesting case. One of the things that struck me right away was the determination of Julie's father, John Ward.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, most people would be just devastated by a loss like that, you know?
Yeah.
But he took his grief and turned it into this relentless pursuit of the truth.
Right.
And that really says something about him. I mean, what was he up against that made him do that for decades?
Exactly. I mean, imagine losing your daughter in such a horrific way and then being told that it was an accident.
Right.
I mean, Julie was a wildlife photographer. She loved adventure. She loved exploring the natural world.
Yep.
And to have her life cut short like that is just heartbreaking. But then to have the authorities basically dismiss her death as just a lion attack, or even more absurdly, a lightning strike. I mean, come on. That's just adding insult to injury.
I know, and that's why John Ward's refusal to accept the official story is so important. I mean, he spent a fortune on this case.
Yeah.
He made over 100 trips to Kenya. He even hired private investigators. That level of commitment,
Wow.
that's not just seeking closure. That suggests that he truly believed there was an effort to hide the truth.
Oh, yeah, there were red flags everywhere. And what's disturbing is that he was right.
He was.
His investigation found evidence that the Kenyan coroner's report had been tampered with.
Wow.
We're not talking about like little inconsistencies here.
Right.
It was like a full-on alteration of the facts just to cover up that she had been murdered.
Oh, my goodness.
And the details are horrifying. But the British pathologist who examined Julie's remains found evidence of dismemberment.
Really?
They found evidence that they used petrol to burn her body.
Oh.
It was like they were trying to get rid of evidence.
Yeah.
And mislead the investigation.
Yeah.
This was not just some random act of violence. It was brutal.
Yeah.
It was calculated.
Yeah, it's chilling. I mean, who had the power to do something like that, and why?
Right, and why go to such great lengths to hide the truth?
Exactly. And that's where the political landscape of Kenya at the time becomes a big part of the story.
Okay.
I mean, this was the late 80s, and Kenya was really reliant on tourism.
Right.
And a murder in one of their most famous game reserves would have been devastating.
Yeah.
So there's a motive right there to protect their economy.
That makes sense, but I wonder if it goes even deeper than that.
Oh, yeah.
Because John Ward started pointing fingers at some very powerful people.
They did.
Members of the Kenyan government. And he wasn't just throwing out accusations. He specifically named Jonathan Moi, the son of the then president Daniel Arap Moi.
Right. And that's where it gets really complicated, because now it's not just a cover-up.
Yeah.
It's saying that the highest levels of Kenyan power were involved in her death. If that's true, it's not about tourism anymore.
Right.
It's about protecting the elite.
This is like something out of a movie.
It is.
You have this determined father taking on a government,
Yeah.
uncovering this cover-up and accusing the president's son. That must have been scary.
Oh, yeah, and don't forget that navigating the Kenyan legal system, especially for a foreigner, was incredibly difficult.
Right.
Corruption was everywhere.
Yeah.
And there was a culture of letting powerful people get away with anything.
Right.
So for John Ward to go up against that system so publicly took a lot of courage.
And let's not forget about the human element. We're talking about a father who lost his daughter in a brutal, senseless way.
Yeah.
And he wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for her memory.
Yeah.
He wanted to make sure that her story was heard.
I know.
And in a way, he succeeded. Despite all the roadblocks and setbacks, his investigation forced them to acknowledge that Julie had been murdered.
Really?
Not killed by animals, but the question of who and why is still out there.
Yeah.
It's unanswered.
It is. This is where things get really weird.
Okay.
The initial investigation led to the arrest and trial of 2 park rangers,
All right.
but they were acquitted, and the whole trial just seemed full of inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Like allegations of witnesses changing their stories, it felt like.
Oh, wow.
They were just scapegoats, you know?
Oh.
Just to make the public happy while protecting the real culprits.
So they basically got away with it.
It seems that way, and then years later they arrested the chief park warden, Simon Ole Makala.
Right.
but he was acquitted too.
Wow. So every time they got close,
I know.
it's like nothing stuck.
It deepens the mystery and makes you wonder if it was just incompetence or was it intentional.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that John Ward was very critical of the Kenyan legal system.
Right. Yeah.
He thought they were more interested in protecting themselves than finding out what happened to Julie.
So we have a motive, we have powerful people who might be involved, and trials that went nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
That's got to be frustrating.
Yes, it is. And it's like a breeding ground for all kinds of theories.
Oh yeah, like what?
Well, some people think that Julie stumbled onto something she shouldn't have seen,
Okay.
like maybe illegal activity in the reserve.
Interesting.
Others think she was targeted because her father was outspoken against the government.
It's hard to know what to believe.
I know it's a tangled web.
And there's also this whole other thing with the British inquest that happened in 2004.
Right.
Now, an inquest in Britain is basically an inquiry to figure out the cause of death,
Yeah.
especially in suspicious cases.
Yeah.
So even though this wasn't a trial, it added a whole new level of scrutiny to the case.
It did, and the verdict from that inquest was a big deal. They said it was an unlawful killing,
Wow.
which totally contradicts the idea of an accident. So that put pressure on Kenya to reopen the investigation.
So you'd think that they would have taken action right away.
You would think.
But it actually took until 2009, 5 years later, for the British authorities to announce they were reopening the case. So it seemed like maybe they were finally going to get some answers.
Right, but then something awful happened.
What?
Valentine Uhuru Kodipo, a key witness who had run away to Denmark years before, died.
Oh no.
And his death was pretty suspicious. He had claimed to have really important info about the murder.
Oh my goodness.
So his death felt like a major setback. It's like the case was cursed or something.
It's like every time they got close, something or someone stopped them.
Yeah, and that's what's so disturbing about this whole thing.
Yeah.
It's not just the brutality of it all, it's the feeling that someone is actively hiding the truth.
It's like a conspiracy.
It is. It makes you wonder if you can even trust the systems that are meant to protect us.
Right, especially when powerful people are involved.
Yeah.
You know, for John Ward, who spent decades of his life trying to find justice for his daughter,
Yeah.
this must have been so frustrating.
I know. He never got the closure he deserved, but at least he made people acknowledge the truth.
That she was murdered.
Right, but the big question of who and why is still unanswered.
It's just so unsettling. There's so much we still don't know.
I know.
It's like a puzzle with some pieces missing.
Yeah.
And we have all these different stories, and it feels like something darker is going on underneath it all.
It does.
It makes you wonder if we'll ever really know what happened to Julie.
I think that's where Grace Musela's book, A Death Retold in Truth and Rumor, comes in.
Oh yeah, I read about that.
She looks at how the story has been shaped both by the facts and by all the speculation over the years.
It's like that game of telephone,
Right?
where you whisper something to someone,
Yeah.
and by the time it gets to the end of the line,
Exactly.
it's totally different.
Yeah.
With all the media attention and the politics and people's own agendas,
Right.
it's almost impossible to know what's true and what's not.
And her book really challenges us to think about how our own views of this case might have been shaped by how the story's been told.
Yeah.
I mean, she digs into the cultural differences, the power dynamics, and the very real possibility that what we think we know
Yeah.
is just one version of the events.
Right. It's a good reminder that the truth isn't always so clear-cut.
It's not.
It's often a mix of different perspectives and interpretations, and when you add in a case like this,
Yeah.
with all the international stuff and the political influence,
Yeah.
it's no wonder it's been so hard to find any answers.
Exactly. And that's why we have to be really careful.
Well,
We can't just believe the first thing we hear, especially with something like this.
right.
We need to dig deeper, think about other viewpoints, and even question our own assumptions.
It's like we have to become detectives ourselves.
Yeah.
Looking at the evidence, figuring out who to believe,
Right.
trying to put the pieces together.
And even then, we might not ever get the whole story.
There might always be those unanswered questions.
That's true, and maybe that's part of what makes this case so interesting.
Yeah.
It reminds us that sometimes, even when we try our best,
Right.
some mysteries stay unsolved.
But at least the search for answers and remembering Julie's story,
Yeah,
those things matter.
they do.
Well, this has been a wild ride.
It has.
We've uncovered a cover-up, talked about all the political stuff, and seen how hard it is to get justice when powerful people are involved.
It's a story that makes you think about corruption and how far people will go to protect themselves.
Yeah. But it's also a story about never giving up and the power of a father's love.
It really is.
If you're as interested in this case as we are, definitely keep digging. John Ward's website is a great place to start. He documented his whole investigation there. There are also tons of articles and documentaries and that book we mentioned.
A Death Retold in Truth and Rumor.
Right. This is a story that needs to be remembered, and hopefully someday the truth will come out. But until then, it's a reminder that the fight for justice never really ends.
I think you're right about that.